Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judith Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give up their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guests for today.
Mentors, thank you so much for joining us today. This is our 25th podcast, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. Our Mentorships in Education podcasts are available to you wherever you get your podcasts, like on YouTube or Spotify. I hope you'll visit our website and peruse our other guests and look over some of our topics to see what may be of interest to you. I want to give a special welcome today to our guest, Kim Inglis. She is from Australia. And I am very excited because I think this is so cool that we're sitting and talking to each other. I am speaking to her on Tuesday and she is talking to me from Wednesday. That is so neat. Let me a little bit introduce Kim. She is an author. She writes under a pseudonym, Kim May. We're going to find out a little bit more about that later. She's an amazing author of children's books, and we've talked about other authors of children's books before in some of our other podcasts. And we've talked about to Kristen Calabrese, who has written children's books, Sedam Khanib, who has also written children's books. We've had Dr. Sharon Celine on, who has written books for adults about children. But this is a very unique subject. And I think you will be fascinated in hearing about our guest's background and how she has taken a very difficult childhood and used it to be able to support the children who are struggling around the world. So before we get a lot into our discussion, I want to tell you a little bit about Kim. She is an independent author. She's worked with children and adults in a variety of social service roles for over 30 years, included volunteering in the Office of Public Advocates Disabilities stream, which is a government-funded agency dedicated to keeping people free from abuse and neglect. She has an understanding of social challenges of children's face due to her experiences with family violence and abuse, and working with children and families in very complex situations. Her brother and she had to end their education early. He was in her 9th year, he in his 10th year of secondary school. They had to go to work to support their family because their father was working only sporadically and they had limited funds. She did not have the benefit of getting a formal university degree, but she has had extensive trainings in so many different areas, from response to sexual exploitation and sexual abuse in children, LGBTQ children, autism, family therapy. She has an amazing background. She's worked in case management, intake, and response roles for children with disabilities and their families. And she's coordinated the disability day services for young adults, overseeing over 100 clients and about 50 staff in her role in working also with children with autism. So with that background a little bit, showing you Kim's dedication and perseverance in pursuing her interests and turning what was a very difficult background into an incredible foundation of information that she now uses to support children. I thought maybe I would ask him to start a little bit with her interest in autism and in nonverbal learning disabilities. She could kind of give us a little bit of a background in that, because that's not quite related to what it is that we're going to be talking about later. So I'm wondering how that came about.
Thank you very much, Judy. Working in the disability sector and working with young people and understanding the difficulties they faced on a daily basis was quite confronting on many levels, because often some of their difficulties would escalate into what people perceive as challenging behaviour, but was not their challenging behaviour. It was that the people didn't understand what they were trying to communicate. So I became fascinated in reading the play, if you like, with how their bodies reacted in certain situations, understanding their facial expressions, their behaviours. And so I set out on a mission to be educated more on autism. And I was fortunate to have extensive training with Dr. Richard Eisenmeyer. And one of the things that really sat with me was when he asked a high-functioning person, or someone on the spectrum, what their day looked like. And he showed us the illustration, and it was a piece of paper with just thousands of squiggles on it. And the person was able to articulate that that's how their day is on a daily basis, just full of chaos.
Wow.
The time they open their eyes to the time they go to sleep. They're constantly observing our facial expressions and what we're saying, words that are coming out of our mouth, but our facial expression does not marry up to that. So for someone on the spectrum to live with that is extraordinarily exhausting. And because of that exhaustion, they don't have a base level like you and I have a base level. They're always slightly elevated, and sometimes the triggers can go from 6 to 10 without any indication, because they're never sitting at 0. So, and then through that learning and journeying, I became very passionate about the vulnerability of people with disabilities and not being able to communicate what may be happening for them. And unfortunately, the day service where I coordinated, there was a case of a person who was sexually abused, and that was only in more recent years. That was not 100 years ago when it was cottages. So, and my granddaughter is on
Okay.
But that happened many yeand later after my training. So that was good, because I sort of diagnosed her before I asked her mum to take her off and get tested. And her mother worked in the sector as well. But she's very, very intelligent, but has the social challenges that many people on the spectrum have.
So let me get back to your passion. You say that you're very passionate about social justice and safety and diversity and equality, I believe, are some of the words that you wrote down. Can you speak a little bit about your experience growing up, your family, and so we can get in a little bit more to what it is you are doing now?
Well, growing up in a very dysfunctional family with a father who was an alcoholic and an abuser, and my mother had significant mental health because of her upbringing. She was sexually abused by her father. Her mother was sexually abused by her father, and the cycle went on. And through that childhood, being isolated in the family, that you were too fearful to develop friendships because you hid behind the closed doors. You didn't want people to know what was going on in the home. So you constantly hearing your parents' opinions on things. And my father in particular was very racist. I have a cousin who is transgender, which was my father's brother's child, and I remember the family outcasting this family member, and which was horrific because this person was such a beautiful person, but because they were transgender, they were isolated from the family. And those things really stuck in my mind, and just seeing the vulnerability of children, and you don't have a voice because you're isolated. You go to school, but you're too frightened to say anything at school in case your parents find out that you may have said something. So my belief is that abuse, trauma, family violence, prejudice, racism is going on in every other house. And we really need to start calling it out and doing what we can to make a difference for the children. And that is my mantra, is making a difference for children, because the children don't have a voice. So we have to equip them to have the tools to be able to communicate what might be going on for them, and things that, you know, we take for granted in our daily life, that you don't know what's happening behind the doors. I'll give you an example of what I perceive to be is cruel and sadistic, an act of my father. He would buy lollies and put them in the fridge and count them, but you weren't allowed to take one, because if you took one, heaven forbid what would happen to you. And I remember I was about 6 and I couldn't resist the lollies in the fridge, and I took the lolly. And I remember when my father came home and he counted them and he said, "Who took the lolly?" And there was the 3 of us, and I was too frightened to say that it was me. So he said, "If you don't tell the truth, whoever did it, you're all going to get a beating." So I couldn't tell the truth and got the beating, and then I got beaten up a second time by my brothers. So, yes, so that's something that's really sat with me.
What's a lolly?
A candy.
Oh, okay. Not a term I'm familiar with.
A candy. And, you know, another time we never went anywhere, and he loaded us up in the car and told us we were going on a holiday. So we packed our bags. I was 7, my brother would have been 8.5, and my younger brother would have been 4. We loaded up the car and we were all so excited because he never did anything for us, never took us anywhere. So we piled in the car and we drove around the block, literally. He pulled back up in the drive and he said, "That was your holiday." And I remember my older brother was absolutely hysterical. So, you know, he gave away my dolls when I was 8 years old. He gave away all my dolls. He burnt all our family photos. I own 3 photos. One's a half a photo from my childhood. I have nothing, no possessions. And so, yeah, I'm very passionate about what I can do from my experiences. And I could go on forever about the cruelty and abuse, but, you know, I think you can get a bit of an understanding about this.
But you left when you were about 18?
Yes, I left at 18 to go and make a life for myself, because I'd been working since I was 15 years old full time. So I was very, very mature. But unfortunately, I left one situation, and as can be typical, I jumped into another situation because that's all I knew. And my first husband, I lived with family abuse with him. And before I even married him, the abuse was starting, but I thought that was the norm. I did not understand what a functional family looked like. And I remember my first husband taking me to some friends of his who had 5 children. And those children would come up and kiss me and hug me. It was the most uncomfortable, disturbing experience for me, because that never happened to me. My family never cuddled. I wouldn't know what it was like to have that nurturing. Wow. So that was very uncomfortable, very weird. But fortunately, I'm a lover, so my children are well loved, and that hasn't impacted them or my behaviour at all, fortunately.
You remarried. You
Yes,
subsequently
yes.
remarried. Okay.
And I've got an older child from that relationship, and all my children, my 3 children, are very healthy, responsible. They work in community type roles, and I'm very proud of them. They're amazing.
Now, when you went to school, before you left and you went to school, your school experience was not all that positive. You had some issues going to school as well.
I was the
some
weird
struggles.
I was seen as the weird kid because I really.
I'm laughing, but it's just so sad.
I think because I put up the barrier that I didn't allow people in. I didn't want to get to know people or develop friendships. When kids were out doing social things, I never did anything. I never went to school camps. I never had parent-teacher interviews with my family. I was just the weird kid. And I remember they used to sing a ditty about me when I was a teenager, and I'll share that with you, but I won't repeat the final word, but you will understand. And it went, Pirate Pete, sunken chest and big flat feet. Her father backed into her with a truck, and that's why no one wants to give her a good time. So,
oh my gosh.
You know, it just, yeah, so I can't
believe you can remember that after all these years.
Oh, it's amazing what children hold on to and the impact words have on people. Words are very, very powerful. And when you're constantly put down and your own self-worth, you tend to believe that is your worth and that is all your worth. And that is just so wrong, because we're a product of often our environment and our upbringing, and that shapes you. But I don't see it as an excuse either. You know, I could probably go and be a mass murderer and go to court and get off because I could talk about my upbringing and the trauma. But we make choices in life, and so I chose to better myself, and that has been my mission in life, and I believe I've done that. And my children are living proof that I have achieved well.
You have such a list of areas where you have received trainings. I didn't list them all, but perhaps you would like to pick out one or two and talk a little bit about where you received the training, how it has, what kind of an impact these trainings or this particular training has had on your life and on your work, perhaps in your writing that we're going to be talking about later on. Are there?
Probably the main area is around family violence, and doing a lot of training around family violence and the impact that has on children and the trauma that family violence has on children. And so I would focus a lot of my need and want to learning to just try to understand why people would behave in that manner. Like, really influential people can become abusers. It doesn't have any particular type of person. It's people from all backgrounds. It's not just low socioeconomic people.
Oh, no.
In power and, you know, high roles. So
the trainings that you had around family violence, family therapy, did it help you bring some closure to your experience as a
no,
growing up? No.
I wouldn't say closure. I would say it gave me a clear understanding, and particularly around my training on mental health. And, you know, trying to understand, like my mother passed away 18 months ago, and as you can imagine, it would have been a very difficult relationship because of, the blame game for not keeping me safe and not keeping my family safe. But all the learning that I did over the years helped me understand she was a product of her own environment and led to her own behaviour and her own difficulties. So not necessarily closure, but definitely a good understanding. I think I had closure when I left home because I never held on to things. And that's sort of been something that has been part of my personality forever, is I don't hold on to things. I don't carry baggage. I'm that cup half full person and always encouraging of others. Life's too short to be bogged down in negativity. It's not helpful. So, it's really important to see the positive things that are around you in life. And I remember reading something about a gentleman. He would just get up every day, and 3 times a day he would just stand still and take a deep breath and just think how grateful he is that he has life. And I think we all have difficulties. Everybody has difficulties with regards to their own journey, but the key is to ask for support. If you're having any difficulties, like I had postnatal depression after my second child, and that was because I was living in such a toxic environment. And I was seeing the therapist. What they told me was this was going to continue until I left that relationship. So eventually I did. And then the postnatal depression subsided, the panic attacks, anxiety dissipated. So there's so much that...
I think it's important when you say ask for help, I think it's important that our children ask for help in many different ways, not always by using words. Sometimes their behavior, as I like to say, is a form of communication. And it's important for us as teachers, as parents, as other professionals who are working with these children to be aware that, and as I quote Ross Greene many times, no child wants to fail. Every child wants to be successful. If our children are not being successful, then we need to listen to the communication they're giving us through their behavior, because they are telling us something, and it could very well be what you are talking about. There could very well be some abuse going on, either verbal or physical abuse going on. I want to talk about your book, that your first book. We'll get into the one you're working on, but your first book, what is it called? What is the name?
It's called Funny Feelings Aren't Funny.
Funny Feelings Aren't Funny. I love that. And talk to us about the idea of the book and where it came from. And I love the title, where that came from. I know there's a story behind that. So.
Okay, so when I was working as intake and response worker, and part of my role extended into a protective behaviour program that I would run in special development schools. And so I had 4 students who were doing their placement who came out to do the program with me, because I wanted to have younger people involved, because the program was for young girls 13 to 17. So I thought, rather than just a very mature person being there, it would be helpful to have some young people participate. And one of the girls who was doing the placement was on the spectrum. So we would go off and we would run the protective behaviour program for the young girls. And on the way back to the office, this young lady said to me,
"So great."
Yeah, she said, "Kim, why do you call them funny feelings when they're not funny?" And I thought,
I love it.
So on the spectrum, and it is so true. but it's a universal language that we use, excuse me, when we're talking about funny feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So it got me thinking more about children on the spectrum, people not being able to communicate. And during the protective behaviour program that I did with the young girls, because they had an intellectual disability as well as a physical disability, and we did a lot of work with art. And one of the young girls, she drew a house, and there was not one human being in that house. It was all animals. And the subject was me and my friends. And I could so relate to how she was feeling. And I thought, wow, you know, there's so much going on for these people, but we're not unpacking it. How do we unpack it? How do we give these people tools to be able to communicate what's going on for them? So I thought, I really need to write a book. And so I had ideas in my head, and I started researching what was available. And every time I put pen to paper, it would go off on a different tangent. And I specifically wanted it to be targeted to the youngest group, from 3 to 8, because from my own experience and from the girls doing the programs, abuse starts way before 13. So I really struggled to contain it, to make it the best way for a child to understand. So this went on for about 6 years. I couldn't get it going where I wanted to go. And then one day in the shower, I had an epiphany, as you do, and I had a little verse in my mind, and I thought, this is it. It needs to be in rhyme. It needs to be through illustration. And so that's how the journey began with the book. And then the rest was easy. So what I do is I draw all the drawings and all the illustrations, put all the content into the illustrations, and then I had to send it overseas with a brief to bring it to life. But fortunately, the way that has evolved has been perfect. I've had a clinical psychologist say to me that the book looks like it was written by a psychiatrist, because the illustrations, because when you look at the illustrations, everybody interprets something different from it. So for someone who's had a great life, they've not been exposed to any trauma, no bullying, life's great, it's a wonderful story about a gingerbread character who shares their experience and their feelings.
No, I'm going to stop you for 1 minute, because your gingerbread characters, you're not showing children in the story. You're not showing a mother and a father. You're not talking about a conventional family. Everything is in fantasy, a gingerbread family. Yes. And I'm assuming you did that very specifically. It was a conscious decision. Can you just talk about that for a minute? Why you chose these characters rather than people?
Well, most children have seen a gingerbread character through their life, and it was very important for me that the character was didn't have a specific race or gender. And I wanted the character to be something that the children can relate to. And if the person who's speaking with the child about the book, that character can be a third person. It doesn't have to be about themselves. And I think it takes away that association for them, so they could communicate, oh, this is happening to the gingerbread. Yeah, I just wanted it to be a neutral character, definitely non-race, non-gender.
Well, do you think it was less threatening for the child to be able to relate to what is happening with a gingerbread character?
Correct.
Rather than another little girl, if it's a girl reading it, or a little boy reading it, maybe the emotional impact would not be there, would be more of an experience, the gingerbread child or parent was having that was similar to the human child without the emotional connection, maybe? I'm not sure.
Yes, I think you're right on the money.
All right. Well, that's what I was thinking.
Yes. So it's not as threatening or uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Character. I think when people put specific children, I think that can be more traumatic, whereas the illustrations are non-threatening at all. They're just so easy and beautiful to look at. And it's an enjoyable experience reading the book. But the purpose of the book is to generate that conversation. So when the adult is reading the book to the child, and the child and the adult talk about the feelings, and if the child does present looking a little bit anxious or worried or concerned about looking at all the images, then the adult can unpack that and get a bit more curious as to what might be going on. I'll give you an example of a foster parent who has 2 children with her. They're 7 and 5, and they were abused, and they had not talked about the abuse for the 12 months that they've been in her care. And she read the book to the children, and then afterwards she said to the older child, which part of the book did you enjoy most? And he said, when the little girl told the police and they helped her. So his interpretation of the character was to be a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it doesn't look like a boy and it doesn't look like a girl. And, yeah, so that's really important, that the children can relate to it based on their own experiences and their own truths.
You said the focus of your books is safety, diversity, culture, and consent. Can you talk a little bit about those and how you incorporate those concepts in your books?
So the Funny Feelings Aren't Funny is specifically about children keeping safe and teaching them to recognise that if they have any of those funny feelings, then something about the situation may not be safe. So it's more about understanding if they have a sweaty palm, a sweaty head, a pounding heart, shaking, wobbly knees, what is going on around them to experience that. So it's teaching them to connect their mind to their body's reactions. So as an adult, our feelings, we use them on a daily basis to navigate through our decision-making and choices. But children aren't equipped to do that. But if they understand their body's reactions in certain situations, then that can become an alert for them as they're growing up that something might not be quite right. The second book, It's All Okay by Me, is all about a gingerbread character's journey with their friends, and their friends come from different race, different background. Again, they're non-gender specific. It incorporates people with disabilities as well. So through the books, there will be characters with a disability. There'll be rainbow buttons. So there'll be lots of references to different things that mean different to different people. And the third book that I'm currently writing that will be available in July is around consent. And we really haven't put in a lot for children around consent in certain areas. We have a lot of focus on social media and the impact that's having, but the kissing and the hugging and the tickling and putting people on your children on your knee.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. I hadn't even thought about consent in terms of those specific.
Yeah.
We just take it for granting. The kissing.
You just take it for granted. So the book is about empowering the child to express how they feel, and for the reader to be more conscious about the child's, how that's impacting on the child, and just checking if it's okay, like going into the bathroom. parents just go in and out, in and out. But how's that child feeling about that? So it's about empowering the child to ask and express how they might be feeling, and it's to remind the adult that don't take those things for granted. Now, one of the verses in there relates very much to people with a disability, and when the illustration is a child sitting on a toilet and there's an adult gingerbread character about to support them. But and the character's saying that it feels rotten when someone strange wipes their bottom. So, it's that person said to the child, is it okay if I give you assistance? And I learned that when working with disabilities, I would take people into the shops and the people behind the counter would talk to me. And I'd say, no, you need to speak to this person. You're serving this person.
Right.
Yeah.
We have a tendency to make a child or a person with a disability invisible. And
yes.
They become the invisible person. And
yes.
We find it more comfortable to talk or to speak directly with a typical person than we do with children or with people who have challenges.
And in fairness to that, I do believe it's a lot of people's lack of exposure to different situations. So, and once they're more familiar, their attitudes change. I ran a program for Year 9 students to work with people with disabilities. And at the start of the program, just seeing the fear on the faces of the students when they came in, being surrounded with people with a disability, to at the end of the program, after 6 weeks, how they engaged with the people with a disability as they would any of their peers. And it was so successful that one of the students disclosed to their peer group that their brother had a disability. Now, this person had been going to school all those years and had not disclosed that. And, the kids, after they did that 6 weeks program, they really embraced the people with a disability as they would embrace anybody. So we really need to do a lot of education around that and provide opportunity, because we don't know what we don't know, and it's the fear of the unknown often.
How are your books at this point being used to support children who we know have been abused and to try and elicit communication from kids who we suspect perhaps have been abused? I know that they're being used in a variety of situations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, they're being used. They've been incorporated into the Victorian Government's child protection resources, so child protection practitioners, psychologists, family service workers, foster parents, psychologists. I remember having some feedback from a psychologist who'd been working with a young boy who was 9. And the books are aimed at 3 to 8, but they represent different to many people, so they go beyond the recommended age. And she used the book with the young boy, and he disclosed that his step-sibling had been abusing him. And the psychologist said to me that when the disclosure came out and the mother became aware of the book, she was very distressed and said that had her child had access to this book, that abuse may not have happened. And she said that every child should have access to the book. And that's my belief too, because children at that age often don't know how to communicate, and the adult, who believes the child over the adult?
Right. So and that's a very important distinction. And as you said earlier, you made the comment you were very uncomfortable when you went into a situation where the other children were hugging and kissing you, because you never, that wasn't a familiar situation for you. You had never experienced that before. And by the same token, at the other end of the spectrum, children who have been abused don't know that they're being abused because they don't realize that there's any difference in any other family, I would assume. And your book and the conversation that adults begin to have with children around the story make the children aware that this is not typical in most families. That this is, yes.
Definitely, absolutely. And we don't know what we don't know. So if a child's in a home and it's common for their parent to jump into bed with them at night, do things to them, that's what they know.
That's right.
They don't know what they don't know.
You talked about foster parents who use the book. Can you talk a little bit about that situation with a 3-year-old girl? I think they had a 5-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl that you talked about.
Yeah.
What's
and
that?
That's what I mentioned before when
that was them? Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Can you think of any other examples where your books are being used in formal settings and therapeutic settings, either maybe in group therapy sessions or with one-on-one clinicians?
Yes, so they're definitely being used well with clinicians and family therapy organisations. I've been approached from an organisation where they've got a working group called The Voice of the Child. So they want to start using the book within their group. So it's being more specific to, the books have been specific mainly to practitioners, but it's for just parents and regular homes that the books need to go into. So I've got independent schools who use the books, early learning centres, health professionals, but I really believe that all parents should be able to have access to the book so they can read it to their children and become more aware of how that child's feeling, and also to teach them to recognise those funny feelings.
I'm sure that you have had some feedback from institutions, schools, for example, with teachers or libraries, librarians that may have read this as a story, because I'm assuming it can be read just as a story. It doesn't have to be just a therapeutic tool.
Oh, absolutely not. And unfortunately, I was booked into some libraries to run sessions with the books, but due to COVID, they've been postponed, because I've also developed a support doll that works in conjunction with the books. And so the doll can be very interactive and a lot of fun when reading the book to children. So that's something that I'm looking forward to that hasn't actually happened yet. But I know the librarians, family therapists, and they absolutely love the books.
When a doll, is it a gingerbread doll?
The gingerbread doll that I designed, it's the same size as the book. So it literally looks like it's jumping out of the book. So for the children reading the book, the doll could be just a little bit of fun and they can hold on to it while they're having the story, or they can talk through the gingerbread as being the third person. So it would just really help them relate.
How tall is the doll? How many inches?
It's 20 centimetres tall, and it's really cute, and it's got butterflies in its stomach. So it's got funny feelings itself.
Oh, that's clever. Butterflies in its stomach.
Yeah, so one of the, throughout the book, the funny feelings can be the butterflies in the tummy when you're feeling a little bit, that feeling in the tummy. So it was important when I designed the doll to have the butterflies in its tummy so the child could relate to
so 20 centimeters, how many inches is that? Do you know?
Hang on.
I'm not sure. What is that? Maybe like
about
three,
8 inches.
three
About 8 inches.
8 inches. Oh, okay.
Yeah, about 8 inches.
Okay, about 8 inches. All right. I had to have a visual. I'm not real good with the metric system. Okay. Okay. All right. So you're planning on reading it in the schools, and the schools are comfortable with the topic of the book?
Oh, absolutely, because the topic is just about teaching the child to recognize their funny feelings, and there's illustrations in the book where it's just how their body reacts if they see a barking dog, or when they're on a snow sled coming down a hill.
Oh, okay.
How they feel at show and tell about being embarrassed. When they go to the doctor and they have an injection, how that feels, how they feel very small when they're in a school group and they can just feel overpowered by their peers. Playing in a sand pit when there's 3 in the sand pit and they're upset, but they don't really know why, because these other characters are having such fun in the sand. So they're very, very good illustrations for the children to relate to.
From a therapeutic perspective, it's a book that I can see would help me with the children I work with be more mindful of their feelings, rather than brushing them off, rather than discounting them, actually being more introspective about them and aware of where they came from or why they're happening. It seems to me that that's what you're trying to kind of bring.
Absolutely. So for the person reading the book to the child and talking about their feelings, and you could ask the child, have you felt like that? And what situation might you have felt like that? And just to unpack it more for them, or looking at their reactions when they're reading the book, and if that's worrying them at all, then you could be having the conversation. Why is that worrying you, or why is that making you sad, or, and just unpacking that more to get to find out what could be going on for the child.
Are your books available outside of Australia?
Yes, the Dole, unfortunately, no, and I've got limited supplies here, but I'm happy to post them overseas if people are interested in them. The books you can find by Googling your local reputable book distributor. So they're available ebook and paperback at Amazon, through Booktopia, Book Depository, Angus and Robertson. There's a lot of them. If you Google them, they will.
We're going to have those links with your podcast, so if people are interested in them, they'll be able to do that. I know your book has won some awards. Would you like to talk a little bit about these awards that you have won? What an honor.
So I have been nominated. So the child
nominated, okay.
Yes. So the child protection, when I presented at the Child Aware Conference in Brisbane for Child Protection Week, Anglicare nominated the book for Child Protection Week Award, and people can go to that link if they would like to view that presentation of the book. So that's at the Child Aware Conference in Brisbane. So if they were to Google Kim May, which is my pseudonym name.
Yes. And I understand that you won't really know whether you have won these awards.
That's right, until July.
July. Okay.
So the Australian Association of Family Therapy have nominated both books for awards. So I find that out in July.
I think that's very exciting. Very exciting.
Yes.
If you were to be asked what words of wisdom you would give to mentors, either parents or teachers or other professionals working with children, aside from your recommendation that they should read your books with the kids, are there any observations that you feel are important that we watch for? Any red flags that you think are important to be aware of? Sometimes as parents, we're always rushing around. We don't always pick up on some of these things. What kinds of words of wisdom would you want to share with us?
Create opportunity for discussion and talk, because often parents get so busy in life that it's just about sitting with the child and catching up and talking with them, because if we don't ask, we don't find out. So, and creating that special time for the child, because children tend to hold on to things. They don't tend to share. How often do our children come home from school and, how was your day? What did you do today? Oh, not much. And can be quite dismissive of that, whereas a lot could have happened in that child's day. So take time out to get more curious about what's going on for the children. Take that time to teach them and learn from them as well, because our children can teach us a lot through how they're behaving, and just be more aware about what might be happening for them. Their eating, their daily routines, if they tend to isolate themselves, if, little things are upsetting them that you can't see what that might be, and teaching the child that it doesn't matter how small what is the issue is happening for them, it's important to them, and in that moment for them, a little thing can be an absolute large crisis. So let's not be dismissive of that, and then the child will build the confidence to share more. But if you shut the child down early in the piece, they're less likely to communicate to you about something more serious.
And I would imagine when you're reading the book to either your child or as a teacher in school to a class, it's important to be aware during the first reading some of the reactions of some of the kids, whether they are uncomfortable with the story that's being read, whether they seem to have, put their head down on their desk and aren't engaged in the story that you're reading. If you're reading a story and the child says, I don't want to read that book, those, I would imagine, are some signs that maybe a conversation needs to be talked about. The funny feelings. Are you having a funny feeling around the book? Like the book says, a funny feeling.
And also if it's used in a group situation, in a school situation, and it's a fun book, but you do see that it has triggered something for the child, if you're going to have that conversation with the child, be prepared to follow through with what you may hear.
Oh, important. Okay.
Very important that you're prepared for what may be communicated to you. So, and be prepared to follow up and follow through, because you would be that trusted adult that child has confided in.
This is so fascinating. I am distressed that you have had to live through an experience similar to what you're writing about in order to have such a depth of information about what these children who are being emotionally or physically abused are going through. But by the same token, you have taken it and you have turned it into an amazing opportunity to help so many children all around the world, and help us as adults, as mentors of these children, to be aware of what these children are going through. I think you mentioned that there was an adult who read your book who had tears in her eyes when she read it. So while you're writing it for 3-year-olds to 8-year-olds, there are many adults who may read this book and remember what they felt like as a child going through something like this.
That's happened on numerous occasions, actually.
I can imagine.
Adults have been triggered by the illustrations, and the illustrations are so innocent. And as I said, for most children, they just love the character, and it's beautiful and colourful, but it's your own experiences and your own truths that is how you will perceive that illustration, what it means to you, how you can relate to it. So the one about bullying, the illustration with the children overpowering the younger child, if you've been bullied before, you'll certainly be able to relate to that. So the book goes through and it talks about learning to understand those experiences and then to communicate to a trusted adult, and then the feelings going away. So I think that's really important for the child, that they learn from the book that if they tell someone about their funny feelings, then those funny feelings, they won't be in their tummy anymore, they'll be flying away.
That's a great analogy. Kim, I want to thank you so much. This has been so informative, and I hope that the people who need to hear this have an opportunity to hear it. I think it will be so supportive and so helpful to many adults, and certainly in their ability to be able to work with the children who need support through this, because we know that child abuse in many of its ugly forms is still out there all over the world. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to tell our listeners that all of the information that Kim has mentioned to us about her books, about her the availability of her books, links to how to contact her are all part of the podcast, so look for them. And I'm sure that she'd be very happy to hear from anyone. If you have any questions and you need some direction, Kim is the person to get in touch with. Thank you so much for being with us, Kim.
Thanks so much, Judy.
I want to thank all of our mentors for joining us today at Mentorships in Education. I hope you'll continue to send in your questions and wonderful suggestions for guests that will be coming down the way, have been the result of people's recommendations. I hope that you will stay safe, be well, and keep connected with us. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and Mentorship and Education podcast, so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners, so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.